to the cloud. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. I think we will start. I think everybody's trickling in, but we can start now. Yeah, thanks for joining our first session of Nucleate's Inside Business Development speaker series. Inside Business Development is one of Nucleate's new initiatives within PATH. PATH is our professional advancement and training hub. This year, we have a really exciting lineup of virtual panels and fireside chats with experts in various life science career sectors like business development and venture capital, and also topics like AI and biotech, aging, and clinical development. And all the talks will be posted on Nucleate's global calendar, and which is on Luma and our LinkedIn. And they're open to the public, just with the goal to disseminate knowledge from experts to trainees. We will have about one talk per week now until the end of May. And next week, the talk is on government funding for startups. That talk has already been advertised on LinkedIn, and it's on the global calendar if you're interested in registering. Today, we have a panel with some amazing speakers who are going to address how to build a team within your work environment. So maybe for many of you, this is going to be a life science startup, but it can also be within a larger company or a lab. I'll have the speakers introduce themselves, and then we'll continue to some moderated questions, and we want this to be interactive for you all to get the most out of this this session. So we will open up for questions from the audience. You're welcome to use the chat function on the Zoom call or raise your hand, and the raise your hand function, and we'll make sure to get to you. And also, as a brief introduction, I'm Andrea. I'm a PhD student at UT Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas. I'm also the EVP of Education and Professional Development programs within Nucleate PATH. And we have some other leadership from Nucleate's business development leadership team here, including Jessica and Ryan, who will help moderate the Q&A. And Ryan would have moderated this first part of the session, but he was called into a meeting last minute, so I'll do that. But I wanted to give a big shout out to him because he was the one that put together this panel for all of you. So I'll start with the speaker introductions now. I guess we can go one by one here. So maybe talk about who you are, your experience in the life science startup space, and what you're working on now.
Okay, so I guess I'll go first. We can go in alphabetical order-ish. I'm Amy Elliott. I am a 2X founder in the life sciences. I have one company that I started with a cool group of people that's for-profit, that was venture funded, and one that is philanthropically funded nonprofit. I'm in between ideas for my own new startups, and so I'm working for a company called Form Bio, where I'm running product. My background is in molecular physiology and biophysics. I like to think of myself as a builder by disposition. I've built everything from molecules to microscopes and software, and so I bridge the gap nicely between execution and product development and R&D.
Yes, I'll go next. So my name is Sarah Hine, co-founder CEO for March Biosciences, which is a clinical stage cell therapy company for T-cell lymphoma, which is a rare subset of the larger lymphoma and leukemia populations. And we're moving our lead asset into phase 2 this year. In fact, we're actively in the process of activating the phase 2 trial. My original training was as a PhD. I came to Houston, Texas originally to get my degree in molecular biology, discovered I loved science and I did not love academia, and then started exploring startups. This was pre-Nucleate, so there was other organizations around Houston where people were able to communicate or build community and network and learnings around startups. And that led me to becoming a venture fellow with Mercury Fund, helping as the most junior person start a company called Courier Therapeutics, which was a retargeted cytokine company, and then we ended up selling that company to Vale Health, and then helped launch an accelerator focused on cancer therapeutics. And that's where I met Max Momokin and Malcolm Brenner to start March. And so we've been at this about 3 years now. It's a little scary to say, and moving pretty quickly.
You're on mute, Steve.
My name's Steve Grant. I've been in the biotech pharma industry for 32 years. Had a couple longer term stints with larger companies and got into the startup world back in earnest in 2012. And been in that world ever since, working with and for VC firms, angel investors, trying to help them recoup some money or be able to shed out a partner, shed out a company to a partner or get a company acquired. I've got into the investment side over the past 6 years as well. So I'm an investor myself. I still work a lot with the Nucleate chapters around the world, not just in the US, but global function as well. Still very much involved in the startup world with several startup companies now. I'm chairman of the board of a new startup over in Denmark called Celestial Bio. And just, here to enjoy this hour with everybody, and hopefully between Amy, Sarah, and myself can share some of our hard knocks and wisdom that we've learned to you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introductions. I know all of you have founded companies, and I kind of want to start by going back in time to the early part of your entrepreneurship career. Maybe can you talk about what was the goal with your technology and product, and how did you think about building a team to execute on that goal?
This is a great lead question. From a business side, I mean, I do not have a PhD, and my background is in engineering. I've been involved in some engineering processes, from sensor development to AI for biocontrol systems. But I come strictly from the business side of things. So when I'm looking at how to get things rolling is strictly on the business side. How do we position ourselves for either an acquisition, to grow a company? And as a co-founder, one of the things that I always like to ask the rest of the team is, where do you guys want this to go? Do we want a long-term opportunity that we're going to be around forever, or do we want to do a 3 to 5 year plan where we get acquired? So those are some of the things that I kind of throw out right at the beginning of the process to make sure everybody's on the same page, instead of having half the team looking for a long-term scenario and the other half wanting to get out in 3 or 4 or 5 years. Sarah and Amy, I'm sure you've got some great input as well, being founders.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that, just because I think you left that in a really nice spot, which is it's about 50% the technology. I'm also was not the technology developer, even though I do have a technical background. For me, when I went to go launch the accelerator, it was 50% trying to create a resource I'd wished I'd had when we did the first startup, and 50% wanting a great opportunity to interact with some of the smartest people all across the ecosystem and find more cool ideas to go launch another startup. And part of that for me was, of course, you can't change the science. It had to be something exciting and different, where I felt like you could see a path forward. And then where I felt like I could be helpful to that process is figuring out the but-for. I call them the but-for questions. Why is this not already picked up and licensed out or sold to Pfizer? We had a clinical stage asset actually in a really high need indication, and it hadn't been picked up yet. And it's like, well, what's the but-for questions there? And that's a deeper conversation. But the other 50% was also just, do I align with this person? You're gonna be working with them a lot. You need to be able to trust them. You need to be able to communicate well, and then work together collaboratively in the future to build a team and be successful moving forward. So
Those are great thoughts. I think it's always so interesting to hear different perspectives, right? I'm a very intersectional being, and so I'm always looking for teammates that have the expertise I do not, because we're always better together when we can riff off ideas. And I like to be at the cutting edge, which means that there is epic amounts of failure involved, because if it hasn't been done before, that means nobody knows how to do it. And so one of the main things that I like to think about when I'm considering teams for starting a new venture is I want to work with people who are energized and hungry and excited about whatever the work is, but also like come from a place of resilience where this isn't going to be their first failure. You learn a lot more from failure than you do from successes. I've also found that funders are more interested in funding people that know what it means to fail and are agile and resilient. And so I'm looking for teammates that are energized and ready to go, but are also inured against the inevitable challenges that are going to come up.
Awesome. And I think some of you have had co-founders too with your companies. Can you talk about how you found those co-founders and what advice you have for people that are currently looking for co-founders? I know we see this a lot with the Nucleate community. Someone has technology, they're looking to build their team straight from the beginning and are looking to have someone with them as a co-founder from the beginning. And some of the qualities you either as a green flag or a red flag, I think would be helpful.
Amy's comment I thought was brilliant, which is, find somebody that doesn't do the things that you do. You shouldn't be trying to do the same job, right? And then stepping on each other's toes. Ideally, you have a co-founder where each of you are bringing separate value to this new venture beyond just wanting to start a startup, right? Which won't sustain you for very long. So, if you're a technical person, I would say you should be looking for somebody who has at least some experience, who has drive and wants to dig in next to you. When you're doing the founding part of a startup, I don't know if other people always agree with me, but I actually always look for people who engage enthusiastically before, not that you should not figure out how people are going to be compensated or do equity splits, but you want people who are engaging enthusiastically, knowing that you're working on this together and you'll figure that part out. Rather than, I see this where people get sucked in, they'll get somebody who's like an advisor or a CEO or a co-founder, and it's the shadow person. You never see them, you never hear them, they're sitting on your cap table, and it just, you've almost set yourself up for a lot of headaches right before you even get going. So start figuring out how it's going to be to work together before you are officially working together. Incorporation doesn't take very long at the end of the day.
And can I just ask a follow-up question before someone else tries to answer this co-founder question? How before you actually bring on a co-founder, how are you actually assessing if they will work well with you? What are the strategies that you put in place? Is there like a yeah.
So for me as the non-technical person, I was not going to be the technical person. So for me, what I wanted to see is, when I'm thinking about starting a company, I'm vetting somebody else's technology. I'm doing the diligence that I think venture is going to ask me. And I want someone who's going to be enthusiastically, collaborative in answering those questions. They're not trying to hide things. They're being honest. We're problem solving together. We can have honest conversations around what is, what are the pros and what are the problems? Because there's always problems. If it was obviously a great idea, other people would have done it already. And it's probably not that great of an idea. So if it obviously looks like a great idea, if you can't have honest conversations around where the problems are, for me at least, that's never going to be a very productive relationship. When I've taught at the accelerator, what I encourage technical founders to do is, like I said, look for people who are helping, provide advice. Here's what you got to think about. Here's some of the things that we should be trying to answer. What, again, adding value, or at least adding, being collaborative as a sort of partner before it's an official thing, because they should be trying to figure out if they want to work with you. And the only way to do that is kind of to start working, right? And the same, and vice versa.
So I'll piggyback on that if I may. I'd like to start with that question and then work backwards to the how to find a co-founder, because I think the point that Sarah made about having problems to solve before you have real problems to solve can be like super important to figure out. So one of the things that I like to do, because I come from experience in technology commercialization. So like starting from an IP perspective, what are the assets? Like what is the idea? What's the IP around it? And what is the like she said, the diligence side of it, right? But then the activity to do that for me is to write the business plan. If you can't work out writing the business plan where you've got a shared vision and everybody is pulling equal weight for whatever their expertise is that they bring to the table, then you're not going to get very much farther than that when you go to actually execute that plan. So that sounds a little bit trite, right? Because it's every business 101 is write a business plan, but it's honestly a very useful exercise. And that's where you find out things like, I want to do it long term and I want to turn this over and M&A really fast or whatever, right? So I feel like finding those problems is easier when you're trying to compile the technology and the vision and what the market opportunity is and things like that to figure that out. So then when I'm looking for co-founders, there are lots of great places. Nucleate is a great place to like go to events and meet new people and get exposure to the whole networking is super important thing, which you're told, but nobody loves if you're a technical person because you're a capital I introvert, is really actually true and super important. So you just never know where you're going to find somebody that will, for example, just to give a concrete example, my first company, I was not the one that had the idea. Somebody else had the idea. We were introduced at an accelerator-like event, and one of her mentors introduced her to me because I had expertise she didn't, and then it just ended up being a really great experience from there. But we developed the business plan, the idea, and all that stuff together over probably 3 months, in a coffee shop to make sure that we could gameplay that out so it would be useful before we ever did our first real pitch.
Yes, it's interesting, Amy, what you said. I mean, that's kind of how I've been involved as a co-founder. Being introduced to founders of companies, and I, like I said right at the beginning of this, I do not have a PhD, but I have other, experience, from a different side on the business side. So what I found is a lot of founders, they don't want to deal. They're more, they're the scientific, they're the introverts. They want to deal with that portion of it. They don't want to have to worry about the business side. So that's how I've been brought in as a co-founder to a couple of companies I've worked with. Is my investment background, my business background, my connection in the investment world, that type of thing. And it kind of carries too to some of the board and advisory positions I've had and still have at some of these startup companies, because they don't have to deal with that. They don't know how to deal with it. So they bring in somebody like myself from the business side as a co-founder or fractional CEO or CCO to help get that company going from the business standpoint.
Yeah, so it sounds like you have like a shared problem where there's multiple people or a few people that are interested in this problem. You get work with them, maybe not so officially in the beginning, just to make sure that this is something that both of you are interested in working on, and working out the business plan. And maybe you decide that you want to be a co-founder with them and start building out this company. Once you've found your co-founder, can you talk about like who your first hires were, why, and some of the early stage positions that need to be filled?
Yeah, one of the things I always look at is, again, not having that molecular biology background. I kind of leave it up to those folks to decide who do we need from the lab side, who do we need from an IT side to develop software that goes along with whatever we may or may not be doing, and then the business side relies solely on my shoulders. So I work with that portion of the business, but as a team, we kind of figure out where the gaps are, and it's funny because most of the founders I've worked with scientific background just want to hire all lab people. We're going to hire 20 people for the lab when you don't really need 20 people. Maybe you need 10, and we can fill other positions along the way. So you have to do some reining in sometimes of what actual positions need to be filled. And you know, you may not get it right the first time. I mean, I've had issues where, you know, we've hired some people and just found out, you know, 3 to 6 months afterwards, maybe we don't actually need that person right now, and we put them on hold until, you know, a year down the road, and then bring them back in. So a lot of different ways to do it, but you know, having that, you know, going back to what Amy said earlier, was having people around you with different core competencies is really key to helping the business grow.
Yeah, I'm a pretty slow hirer. And I think it depends on what stage you're at too. If you're still early preclinical, you know, what Steve said, you're going to need some lab people. Probably not as many as you think, right? If the lab is coming from to get through early preclinical work wasn't 20 people, you probably don't need 20 people to get a basic project done, right? We did for a long time, and even still, we were leveraging consultants in a pretty dedicated way. So, you know, when we were talking to venture even, you know, I could point to people, it's like, look, we filed an IND, you know, FDA sends comments. They don't give you a huge amount of time, you know, turn around. We still had people working over the weekends and stuff. They weren't less engaged for being consultants, but we didn't need them full time. So we're still early and still getting funding. My first full-time hire then was somebody to help me on the operations side, just a more junior person who had less experience, but a lot more, you know, perspiration left, and who was able to just dig in and make sure, you know, we were, you know, being air traffic controllers. And then after that, we did hire a COO, and then we've grown the team quite a bit in the last few months since we closed our Series A.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think that it's so much of it depends on like where you are and what you need, and also the appetite, I think, for many hats. A lot of people gravitate towards startups because they want to be able to wear multiple hats and do multiple things. They get bored easily, or they have growth areas where they want to learn new things, and a startup provides an opportunity to do that because you aren't so pegged into whatever one very defined role that you're needed for. I would also say that, like, I currently live at a tech bio company, which is the software side of healthcare and life sciences. And that's very different, right? Tech is very different from biotech, and tech bio is right in this interesting in between. So you've got software developers, you know, bioinformatics people, AI ML scientists. The order in composition of those teams ends up being a mix of what you need to build and the core competencies you have for building that, and how you're going to sell it. Because at the end of the day, in a for-profit company, you've got a product that you need to sell. If your product is a drug, then you've got a more restricted path to get to the commercial side of it, because you have to go through so many regulatory and development steps. If you are a software company, then that isn't the case. And so you've got also a sales team that you have to get your customer identities figured out, and like how you're going to go about that. So like Sarah, I tend to be a slow hirer. I'd rather hire more junior people that are going to use less of my runway from my venture funding to get as much done as possible before bringing in more expensive, you know, more experienced but narrower focused people. So there's a scrappy sort of way to do it, and then there is a more senior resourced way to do it. And if you're doing something consultative, then maybe that is what makes more sense.
Sorry, Steve, I know I don't want to like block you. I just wanted to flag one thing that she said, which I thought was just interesting. We've hired, I call it like, they need to have a certain amount of the like knowledge that I need, but it could be like 60 to 70%. We can train the last bit. And you can borrow knowledge through consultants. What consultants don't always have is dedicated time and energy, but they have experience. But the super experienced people don't want to do the hours and the grunt work that's required for an early stage startup. A lot of times it feels like taking a step back if they're doing all their own grunt work. And so it's a nice tandem strategy you can take.
Well, it's interesting you said that, sir, because, you know, the way I got into this was through consultancy, right? Advisory roles. And, you know, I saw a definite, you know, a need for, you know, I just a quick story to kind of highlight it was, I remember, introducing, this a founder to a VC, and I remember we had a meeting set up where we were going to go, sit down and they were going to go through the pitch deck, and she said, "Can you come along?" I said, "Sure, absolutely." Got to the site, got to their office. She's sitting in their lobby, literally sweating, like almost in tears, because she didn't want to do this. And she said, "I can't do this. You got to help me. You got to be my co-founder. You got to do something to help us out with this." So it was kind of like, I went from that consultancy side to not having a lot of hours to making dedicated effort to really spend time with some of these people that really, really had something that had legs to bring to market. So it was an interesting transition, but, as you said, that role, sometimes you don't have enough hours, but when you're in the fractional role, you make the time, you make the hours, and you're very dedicated to it.
Yeah, and for some of the positions that are maybe more general or not as specialized, the positions you're talking about, what strategies do you use to recruit these people? Where are you looking, and how do you know that you're confident with an applicant?
I'll take that first. I guess this is an excellent and I think rather nuanced question. Because in my opinion, and maybe not everybody agrees, I'd love to hear everybody else's opinion, but in my opinion, identifying and selecting the right people for the right job is its own skill. That's its own skill set. Not everybody is good at that, and recognizing whether or not you're good at that is extremely important early on. So at least for me, I rely on my own network to help me identify people who are looking for opportunities and then try to match things up that way. I don't like using recruiting services solely because they're expensive. And in an early stage startup, you have to be very conservative with your funds so that you have the runway to hire the people that you need, right? So I prefer to use my network both academically and in industry to identify those people that are going to be the right fit, and then do a series of interviews. And the way that people set up interviews is like so different depending on what the role is and what the industry is. Tech is very different from the healthcare and life sciences in that respect. But at least for me, it's having conversations, it's asking hard questions, it's seeing what questions they ask me, because that's another really important thing for me. I want critical thinkers. I want people that are not going to be afraid to ask me hard questions and things like that. So I think the criteria are generally mixed, but that's how I like to go about it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, look, we've been doing this for a while. We have good contact databases, good contacts in the industry, and I'm not a big fan of using recruiters. A, because they are expensive. B, because some of them are kind of, and no offense to anybody, some of them are kind of like Toyota salesmen. You hear from them once and that's it. If you don't buy the car, they don't call you back. So, that's exactly what I do as well. Is the point is I use a lot of my own contacts and try to find the right fit for the right positions. And I leave it up to the internal makeup of the company. I absolutely do not let the board on any company that I work with get involved in that process. They will destroy a hiring process without you even knowing it. And you all are going to work together. Everybody in this company is going to work together. The board's going to oversee, the money and want updates, but they're not going to be working with these people. And that's why I try absolutely at my very best to keep the board out of a hiring process.
Yeah, everybody I've hired, even as a consultant or fractional person, because I was quote unquote supposed to do it, did not work out. And everybody that we hired, because you had alignment around perspective, needs, skill set, what are the gaps that we have, has worked out really, really well. And once we've got the first few people in that were sort of our core, great people know other good people and will also help vet and defend your culture as well, and the additional people that you're bringing in. So there's a few recruiters I'm friendly enough with, and there's one or two I'd even consider using, but we've never had to yet. And I think it's very frustrating to them because we keep finding really good people, even as we've been growing rapidly. I did want to say something because Amy said, she said, you're an introvert with a capital I a lot of times. I'm actually naturally an introvert. I've had to learn to pretend to be an extrovert. And it's still very difficult, particularly when I'm tired. But when I was still a trainee, and I started showing up to events, it was very, very difficult to me. And it's the whole concept of networking felt very mercenary and anathema. And so my rule was I just started going to all these different events and find one or two interesting people to have interesting conversations with every event. And if you do that, particularly in an ecosystem like Houston, you can meet basically everybody over time, or you'll be like 1 degree of separation away. And then when we needed to start figuring out how to plug holes and get work done, I was able to reach out to people who wasn't reaching out to my network per se. I mean, that was what I was doing, but I was talking to my friends who I thought were smart about who they would recommend. And that makes it a much more tractable problem.
That's an excellent point. The only other thing that I want to add before I forget is like the sort of the consultative model, like where you just hire consultants to do the work that you need in the meantime. I have also found that to be extremely valuable. The other thing that I have really loved is interns. So like my alma mater for both my PhD and my my bachelor's degree, I have relationships with the education and training offices of both of those schools. And so when they've got graduate students who, it's often graduate students who are like looking to break into, right, entrepreneurship or industry or whatever, those are really excellent people. They require a little bit of training, right? Like it's a relationship and it's a commitment to have an intern, just like it is for them to commit to do the work. But I have found those to be some of the most valuable resources, and those, you know, those people are going to grow up, if you will, to greatly expand my network over time as well. And so that's something else I will say I have found very valuable.
Yeah, that's a nice point, because I know a lot of us in the graduate programs we're also looking for positions. So it's nice to see that companies and organizations are looking for those people. So maybe like going, once you've interviewed people, you're super excited about someone, they start and they're a great addition to the team. Like what are your strategies to retain these excellent people at your company and make sure that you can sustain growth by keeping a core solid team without a lot of turnover?
That's the $1 million question, right? You know, look, I mean, I live in the Boston, Cambridge area. I mean, you know, you can't throw a rock without hitting the startup company where I'm at. And I mean, there's always competition, you know, XYZ startup, you know, you go to work there, you know, somebody starts there and the guy down the hall or on the floor below, you know, they're looking for somebody and they offer more money, you know, than what you are at XYZ company. I mean, that's a great question. And it's a big challenge nowadays because, you know, there have been layoffs in the industry, you know, but on the flip side, you know, there's been a bunch of startups that are hiring those people that have been laid off. So it's kind of like a revolving door. And I think, you know, to maintain, you know, to keep people, you know, happy and, you know, on board and not looking at other opportunities. I mean, you challenge them. I mean, that's how I've always done it. You give them new challenges, and whether it was Amy or Sarah, we talked about, you know, wearing many hats. You know, sometimes you have to give people more hats to keep them happy, and that's, they like being busy and they love what they're doing. And the more responsibility you give them, the more they feel wanted and there's a bigger part of the organization. That tends to keep people there for a long time.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. I think relationships are a different kind of management than that requires longer term thinking, right? Like your product is going to turn over, your strategy is going to turn over as you grow, as you mature. But I think keeping as long as you hired a core group of people that you know are the core group of people that you need to see the entire vision through, then I like to work backwards from that in terms of thinking about the funding that I've got for those core people. I like to recognize people that I think are going to be part of that bigger vision versus like consultants or shorter term project based roles where they're going to come in and maybe it's less important, right, if they turn over. So I think this is a place where it's useful to be very both strategic and tactical, because you want to be able to offer incentives to stay as needed. That's going to be financial, it's going to be stock options, it's going to be whatever. But then you also have to keep the brain engaged. So for me, because I get bored in like 5 minutes, I like to think about what is it going to take to retain me, and then try to work that into like how I work with individual people. I consider the relationships that I have with my employees as both a boss and a mentor. So I like to have conversations about like, where is it that you want to go in your career? Nobody stays with a company for 32 years and retires these days. That's just not realistic anymore. So if we start from the premise of you're going to have a next step in your career and it's not going to be here, what do you need from me to get you there? And that I also find helps people stay engaged in where they are and have a meaningful trajectory. And also it gives you a heads up when you can think about when you're going to need to replace that role if their long-term goal is to leave. And the other thing that I find is that having very candid discussions about stuff like that up front builds trust in a relationship. That means they're not going to walk out the door when they get a better offer without having a conversation. And so these are kinds of relationship management things that go beyond just a sort of a traditional manager and employee role.
Yeah, you think of your employees as customers, right? You know, how do you retain customers? Be engaged with them, you know, follow up with them, you know, that kind of thing. And employees are the same way. I mean, you have to show care and concern. I mean, it's kind of like the bad word in the industry sometimes, but you know, the people that do that for their employees retain employees a lot longer.
Yeah, I would just say, my expectation when I hire people is I'm hiring people that have options, ideally, right? I better be, because if I'm hiring good people, they probably have options, even if they're more junior, right? Smart people, people who are adaptable can probably go figure things out, and they have a certain amount of confidence. So we pay people, you know, competitively. We don't necessarily apply a discount just because we're in Texas. I don't pay at the upper end of Boston rates either. We are still a startup in Texas. So, but we make sure people feel like compensated, but cash, my experience at least, anybody that's good can get paid well any place. So it's more of a disincentive if you're not compensating people fairly than it is a good reason for people to stay. So again, yeah, give them hard problems, help them understand what are the goals of the company, and help them see how their work is impactful. And I don't think there's too many people who are in this kind of business who don't respond really well to that.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up for the audience. So to all participants, start thinking about what questions you want to ask the speakers. But going back to the question we just asked, can we talk about the flip side of this? So what if you hire someone that's not working well with your team and starting to make maybe even a toxic environment? What are your strategies to mitigate this, and maybe not get to the point where you have to fire them? Or if you do, how do you kind of navigate that? But if you don't want to go through the firing process and you're trying to bring the culture back to a place that you're happy with, like what strategies do you use to do that?
I fire them. I'm just gonna say if it's a toxic culture issue, if we're too small of a team, I've not had to fire very many people, but when I did, it was decisive and relatively quick. And it was because I was seeing negative impacts on the rest of the team, and it was causing chaos and unhappiness. So that's my answer. I did have people that needed more training than expected, but who were working hard and showing up and making progress. And you could see they were learning, and that we supported and just figured out how to continue to get them what they needed.
Yeah, and I'm with Sarah on that. I mean, I've been in many situations throughout my career where I've seen the toxicity, and you have to nip that in the bud. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's like, you know, it's like bare metal and rust. You know, rust spreads quick. Toxicity will spread quick. They'll make the rest of the team unhappy, less productive. It may even push them to the point of they're starting to look around to get out because they don't want to be part of that anymore. And you definitely don't want that. And you know, good managers can see that right up front. And you know, And Sarah, to your point, if it's somebody that needs a little more training, hey, I'm happy to work with people and give them more training, you know, and because they want it. Usually they ask for it. And, you know, that to me is not a bad situation. That's a win-win for everybody, giving them more opportunities. But the toxicity portion, right away, done, finished.
Yeah, I've seen some weird things. I've seen some weird things. So in general, like my position on this is we'll have a conversation and I will give somebody an opportunity to show me that they are willing. I prefer to be very direct. This is absolutely not the kind of thing that you can beat around the bush about. Like if somebody is a problem for my team, I'm telling them they're a problem for my team and this is how, and these are the things that I need to see change on to save their job. So I do prefer to give people an opportunity to show me that they're willing to do that work, because usually there's something very specific and very obvious that they can either get further training on or not. If it's a toxic personality, period, you can't expect somebody to change who they are, out, period. They'll find a team that works for them. If it's not mine, you don't have the time or the money to, you know, massage people into different people. That doesn't work out, right? So I totally agree on that. I have, however, seen interesting situations where it's you know, it's a person that is maybe more senior. You can't actually afford to fire that person because of know-how or skills or whatever it is. And so I have done things like isolate that person, put layers of people in between them so that, like, it's a senior person, it's a VP level person, they can't access the ICs, the individual contributors, so that those people are protected from that toxicity, because the workers that are actually doing the work, you can't afford for them to be in a toxic culture. Those are the people that have to be protected. So so I have seen some weird and interesting shenanigans that I consider expensive and not the best way forward, but politics are also a thing here. So sometimes you have to take extraordinary, bizarre measures.
Yeah, thank you so much for that advice. I think I'll pass it off to Ryan and Jessica, and maybe they can lead the Q&A. If anybody has questions, again, you can use the chat or raise your hand, unmute yourself, and ask our speakers.
While questions are starting to come in, I kind of want to piggyback off that. I guess, you know, it seems culture fit is, you know, a main priority. So is there a way that you're able to tell early on whether or not a certain employee will mesh well, or is it more of, you know, you're going based off experience and you think that they can benefit the team, and then, you know, you kind of find out whether or not that's going to work kind of down the road?
You know, as a hiring manager, you kind of have to look for this early on, right? During the interview process. You know, if you've done, you know, enough interviews, you kind of see trends here and there, good, medium, bad. You know, so a lot of it's left up to, you know, having them talk with different people on your team. And, you know, get a perspective from everybody. Maybe, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 people on the team have a conversation with the potential new hire. And then, you know, kind of have a roundtable at the end and figure out, you know, what everybody's thought process is. And, you know, I've only seen a couple instances where everybody was wrong and it turned out to be a bad hire. Usually people can kind of get a good sense of an individual. You know, I can't tell you how many people I've hired in my career, but, you know, I've had a couple that, you know, I was wrong about, and, you know, everybody else was right. And you know, I missed something along the way. So you know, you gain experience in the hiring process, and you kind of can see patterns along the way.
Either one of you want to add on to that, or?
There's particular, it's hard to describe. There's sort of a startup quality I tend to look for in people, which is it's sort of a blend between curiosity and drive. I like ambitious people. I'm not too worried about if they want to take my job, that's great. We'll have that conversation down the road. I don't think they'll be successful so far, but you know, maybe my dream would be for them to quit us down the road, and it's because they want to go do their own sort of startup, and, you know, I'd be unhappy for myself but happy for them, kind of thing. There's a drive that I look for. And then I look for people with sort of integrity and honesty and openness as well. And that's partly just because that's what fits our culture as well, as it's very open and direct culture of communication. After that, you just find out really quickly how people are working together. But I really, really don't like firing people. So try to minimize it down as much as possible.
The only thing I'll add is that for me, when I'm bringing somebody on in the very early stages, like that core group of people that I expect to be part of the longer term vision, I want to know that those people are going to be good hiring managers, because I can't be everywhere, right? I can't do everything. So I want to make sure that my first round of hires, who are going to be the ones whose teams grow, are going to have the intuition needed to pick their people to the best of their ability.
Awesome. So questions are starting to kind of flow in, so I'm going to just start reading them off. I'll probably just assign them to one of you three, and then if someone wants to add some quick comments, we can kind of go through that way. So you mentioned, in startups, obviously there's going to be certain people that are going to be wearing multiple hats. So how do you kind of manage the conversations where you're having certain conversations with certain employees and not with others? Do you kind of share your entire business vision with everyone, or is it kind of restricted to select individuals? I'll kind of start with Sarah.
I try to share as much as I can across the business to everybody. Everybody should hopefully know, what our goals are. In fact, they have their own individual goals that are set based on our overall corporate goals, and they have full transparency into that. I want them to be able to make good decisions, which means they need to not just have their tiny bits of information, but they need to understand how it impacts across the organization. So everything, we're pretty open about most things, other than things that have to be confidential, like compensation, that kind of thing, certain board decisions.
Awesome. Steve or Amy, any additional points to that, or?
No, I'm in agreement with Sarah. I mean, try to share everything with the team. In the startups, you're a small enough team where all this stuff matters to everybody. As you start to grow, then you can kind of pick and choose the groups. Give a deep dive to some groups that really need to be in the know about it, and then kind of give an overall picture, broader scope to everybody else. But initially, try to keep everybody in the same category of hearing what's going on.
This is another place for me where I rely on the managers to have some discretion about what it is they're going to tell their teams. So there's a core group that knows everything. There's a certain amount of stuff like the mission and vision and some of the even like where we are with fundraising or whatever stage. I prefer to be as transparent as possible with the whole company, because that's another thing that fosters retention, is people feeling like they know what's going on and they're part of a community that's transparent. So but in terms of like deep dives and stuff like that, that's something else that I rely on the team leads to have some discretion over who's going to hear what.
Awesome. So this one's going to be towards Amy. So what's the best strategy to kind of grow the business side of a startup? There's a lot of companies that are R&D focused, and they tend to focus solely on the science, but don't think through the kind of that business aspect. Do you have any insights on kind of how to approach that, and some ways to kind of make sure that the business side is definitely getting, the attention it deserves?
So I can talk about that from the perspective of my technical background. I'd also love to hear Steve's thoughts on it as the business side of it. So from where I sit, right, I'm looking right out the gate for somebody to join my early team that is somebody like a Steve that's got business development skills. Sales and business development are not the same thing. So a sales team is going to be easier to hire. You can hire them later. The business development person is going to know what that needs to be. But early on, you need somebody that's going to be able to figure out who your customers are, what the product market fit is, if that's relevant, like things like that. And so I want somebody right out the gate who's going to be able to lead the building of that team, somebody who understands the vision and things like that. So as a technical person, I'm focusing on somebody like that who is going to, again, have the skills that I don't have. I've got technology commercialization experience as well as the founding, so I understand the IP and et cetera, et cetera. The stuff that I know less about is where I'm going to want to hire a BD person to take the lead on that. And Steve, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, that's why I get involved in some of these companies, because they they get to that brick wall, as I call it. They've got a great product, great technology. Oh God, what do we do now? How do we get it out there? How do we start generating revenue? And, you know, with the amount of time I've spent in the industry, I've built a significant amount of contacts. You know, I can call the Yvonne Greenstreets of the world at Alnylam and sit down with her tomorrow for coffee. And, you know, that's the type of relationships that I can bring into a startup company that's very successful. So you're not wasting a lot of time from the business side trying to find the right people, trying to find who to talk to. And, you know, the other side of it is from the investment side. I mean, you're bringing investors, future investors into the company, you know, when we get to that point for Series B, C, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, a business development role is not strictly going out and generating revenue. It's everything that comes with that. It's bringing more contacts into the company, more potential revenue streams, whether it be VC or collaborations or mergers, that type of thing. So it's, you know, I'm trying to figure out a different way to word business development, because it's kind of got a stigma to it, but it's really an overall big picture business side of the process that really encompasses a lot.
Awesome. Really like both those responses. I don't know, Sarah, if you wanted to add anything really quickly to that, or.
I just wanted to add one quick comment that BD's not, I think BD isn't magic because it can't sell something. You can't sell something that's not ready to be sold, or you can't partner something that's not ready to be partnered. And I think what the technical founders miss on sometimes is not bringing in some of the additional experience around between the BD or the CEO and the bench is the development people, or at least on a consulting basis, to help you identify what the gaps are that pharma or venture might know about. Tends to be manufacturing or regulatory or both, to help you be able to tell that story with more clarity for your BD person and help create that continuity. That's all.
Really good point. So we'll do one more question and kind of leave it up to each one of you to kind of give like last thoughts of, you know, your main takeaway of what you've learned and things like that. You know, when's the best time to give equity to new hires? You know, especially kind of early on, you know, salaries may not be as high as what you'd like to give as you kind of go for fundraising. Kind of what's your thoughts on that? Steve, we'll start with you and then.
Yeah, great question, whoever sent that in. I mean, you know, as a startup company, that's kind of a given nowadays, that you will be getting equity in the company in lieu of, you know, the six-figure salary that you would be getting if you went to a Pfizer or a Moderna or Novartis or Sanofi type of thing. But, you know, it also is an incentive too, because, you know, you get people that are interested and passionate about making the company successful. And if you give them that stake in the company, they will do everything in their power to make sure that comes to fruition. That's just my experience, what I found. I think it's hugely important from a business side, you know, within the company to offer that equity and let that equity be the driver in a lot of cases for the success of not just the individual, but the company as well.
Awesome. Sarah or Amy, want to add last minute thoughts to that?
If you're not paying somebody at all, in my opinion, yeah, that's a co-founder. May not be a co-equal co-founder, but if they're starting the company with you and you're all working on perspiration and not much else, you know, that's another additional at minimum advisor, right? Or founder with you starting the company, because you're starting the company, you don't have any money yet, you don't have anything else yet. That's the definition of starting a company. We give equity offers with all of our new hires. We have a plan, you know, for our roadmap of hires and what we would offer. We offer competitive salaries. So in my opinion, it's not really a compensation for not paying people's salary. We've scaled that as is appropriate as we've gone through seed and then now Series A. It's a compensation for the risk that someone takes to their career doing a startup versus doing a much more stable pharma or larger biotech job, right? So it's not helping them pay their bills today. It's the upside that they would get down the road. And there's tons of tables on compensation benchmarks.
Okay, awesome. So, but only have a few minutes left, but kind of really want to ask each of you to kind of provide, looking back, what's the biggest thing, that I guess you've learned through, your experience that you think can really benefit an early stage, early entrepreneur or somebody who's definitely looking to kind of join a startup early on. I'll start with Amy. It's your top left on my screen.
I guess the biggest thing that I've learned is let me restrict it to the team building part, which is the purpose of our conversation here. I would say that when I'm starting a company, the first 2 to 5 hires are really critical. I spend a lot of time making sure that that's going to be a good culture fit. We have the same vision, et cetera, et cetera. So I focus a lot on building that first seed team.
Awesome. Steve?
Yeah, listen, I echo what Amy says on that. I mean, it's building that core team that really gets the ball rolling, to really progress the company at a higher rate of speed and less bumps.
Awesome. And last but not least, Sarah?
Yeah, I would say when you're starting out, don't be too precious with your ideas, obviously. Especially once you've filed your core IP, you should probably have, if it's an institution, started, technology focused business. Most ideas look a little bit crummy at the start, particularly when they're really early and there's not a lot of wrapping around or validation around it. The chances of somebody stealing your ideas are relatively low, but the chances of you not understanding what the gaps are and figuring out how to tell your story are very high, unless you're willing to go talk to people and get that feedback. So, and that's part of how you find the team too, is you figure out who's excited to do this with you.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the three of you joining this panel. This has been truly kind of a really great start to kind of the Inside Business Development series that we're going to be running here. Couldn't have asked for any 3 better speakers. So I want to kind of really thank you again for volunteering to kind of participate. And with that, we'll kind of end that here. So thank you everybody for showing, and looking forward to kind of having everybody join the next few.
Thank you, Jessica.
Awesome.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you all
very much,
Thanks,
everybody.
Sarah.
Have a good one.